for joining us today on our webinar. Title and what we're going to be looking at is how to align talent acquisition and strategic sourcing. Strategic sourcing, procurement, I mean, kind of insert whatever phrase you're most familiar with. There's a lot of questions surrounding this topic. We put up a few polls and asked for some feedback in advance of this webinar. Got a lot of great feedback, actually. So I'm excited to kind of present on this topic, work through some of the questions from the audience, and we'll do our best to answer everything that was submitted. Of course, as Laura mentioned, fire anything through the portal itself while we're talking, and we'll jump to that at the end. Before we get started, a quick introduction of myself. I'm Travis O'Rourke. I lead the Hayes Talent Solutions business here in Canada, focusing on kind of workforce management challenges for the most part. But I do have a deep background in staffing all across North America, about 15 years plus experience now. That's being a little bit generous. I've been with Hayes in Canada itself for about 7 years now. And again, as I mentioned, Talent Solutions is where my business sits now. Hayes, as an organization, we are a very large recruitment provider. I think at one point we were saying we placed a person every minute. That was at one point last year. So very, very large, 33 countries. Talent Solutions is where we focus on our outsourced. So MSPs, RPOs, payrolling solutions, that sits kind of within our world. And as we look at a topic today where procurement tends to get involved, it's more often in these larger opportunities or in the flexible workforce in itself. So that's where we'll spend the majority of our time talking today. But I'll send it over to Bill.
Hi, thanks, Travis. I'm Bill Michels. I'm VP of Operations Americas for CIPS, or Chartered Institute for Procurement and Supply. I have over 30 years experience in supply management, and I'm really happy to be on this webinar. In fact, when I was preparing, it reminded me of a time when I was working with a biotech group, which was a bunch of scientists, and all of a sudden they got regulatory approval, and now they were looking for every kind of skill you could get, commercial, or management, operations, and so this is really a great webinar to talk about how do you do that when you're in a situation like that. The organization I work for, and I'm recently appointed there, as an organization has over 200,000 in its community in 150 countries. We have offices across the globe. We're not for profit, but we're dedicated to the development of the procurement professional. CIPS for Business, we have 900 private and public clients, and for individuals, over 70,000 exams taken a year, 300 assignments submitted, and 200 study centers worldwide. So again, we're dedicated to the development of the procurement profession.
Thanks, Bill. I know specifically, in the UK at least, CIPS is kind of the governing body almost. You look at it, it's the biggest brand in the space. So I think you're making a lot of inroads in the Americas, and really happy to have you here.
Oh, thank you.
Wanted to, I guess, kind of start by talking why we're here today, maybe set the landscape a little bit, and how there kind of became a need or a demand for aligning talent acquisition with strategic sourcing. So if we go way back when kind of everyone came through a company, came through HR. Now, one way or another, maybe they came through a manager or a referral, but at one point HR was involved in probably putting together a contract or an offer letter. And that was true for both flexible and permanent employees. And when I say flexible, I'm referring to the flexible non-permanent workforce. So that might be temps, contractors, even certain SOW engagements. That's what I mean by the flexible workforce. So anyways, the worker comes through HR, then that company would pay the worker or the incorporated person, but they also, of course, pay the permanent employee. So HR was kind of that all-encompassing gateway. But then kind of came certain contractual challenges on the flex side, and there was temps would fight and say, wait a second, I was actually a permanent employee, but I didn't get any benefits or any stock options. I'm sure everybody remembers the big Microsoft class action where a good chunk of their temporary employees accused the company of improperly denying them benefits, and they maintained they were actually permanent employees and they should get the same benefits. So as of course the lawsuit wins, and kind of the new world was born. One of the ways that this was kind of dealt with was by using third-party payroll providers. And you can't see me right now, but I'm using air quotes when I say payroll providers, because a large proportion of this workforce is, of course, incorporated, and that's the business-to-business relationship, where you should never use the word payroll, and the worker should also never be paid via your payroll, but that's another issue kind of altogether. But anyways, these payroll providers would come and sit in the middle between the company who was using the service and the worker who was providing the service. It's a bit of a farce, but the person would sit in the middle and, again, add that kind of extra layer of protection. How could the person possibly be considered my employee? I don't even pay the person. That's kind of where it was born from. And then slowly but surely over the years, the flex or the non-permanent category has continued to expand exponentially, and it brings in now, of course, the full cycle recruitment as well, not just the payrolling through the third-party providers. So it's all born around minimizing risk. Of course, the recruitment expertise is a piece of it, but it was born through risk, or risk elimination at least. Now, the majority of perm employees are still hired through talent acquisition. Maybe human resources or line managers or talent acquisition. Point being, 90% of perm staff are hired internally by someone. The other 10%, roughly, search party firms. These are going to be typically your niche or your harder to find roles, executive categories. The agency is essentially your hired gun to bring in the expertise where it may or may not exist within house. Now, on the contrary, on an effort to reduce risk, the flex category kind of continued to evolve, and almost everything is now moved to an outsourced level. Now, it might not be through an MSP or a single kind of RPO provider, but it's largely handled through staffing agencies or staffing agency equivalents, and that's true pretty much across the continent. HR still will often advertise and even recruit for these flexible or temporary roles, but more often than not, they're then passed on to one of these third-party payroll providers in order to engage the workers. Important to kind of level set, what I'm speaking of today is for your kind of mid to large-sized organizations. Of course, the mom and pops are still very frequently recruiting and paying their own temporary staff, but conversation today is looking mostly kind of at that enterprise level. So if you kind of couple this with the actual full cycle third-party recruiters, the third-party payroll providers, the spend in the category starts to get pretty massive, and it started to get huge very quickly. If you look at an IT person who might make $100 per hour, that quickly looks like $200,000, $250,000 per year in spend going out to a third party. Now you've got 4 or 5 workers, $1 million disappears on half a project quite quickly. So enter procurement, who kind of in an effort to help control this category began to wrestle the tactical, not necessarily the strategy, but the tactical of the category away from HR. And until recently, this is pretty much how it's been, where HR owns perm and procurement kind of owns the flexible or the non-contingent category. But the problem with this is that the contingent workforce was never supposed to grow as large as it has. And HR has spent a lot of time building and creating and promoting their employer brand. We see a couple of great examples on screen right now, which talks about the benefits or what the work-life balance is and how great it is to work at this organization for reasons other than the financials. But the problem is the contractors, because they're not employees, they don't get any of these benefits. And contractors have an entirely different set of motivations. But their voice is getting louder. The stats on screen come from a recent survey that we ran here in Canada. And 89% of candidates in the market today are willing to leave their current job. So that's 89% of everybody. 9 out of 10 people on this call would leave if the right offer was presented to them. Below that, 80% of, again, the entire population would accept a contract role. So again, 8 out of 10 people on this call would accept a job. Now that is a drastic shift in thinking, because most people would imagine, well, if Billy is in a permanent job right now and he's stable and he's got pension, he's got benefits, why would he ever leave to take a contract role? And everyone's motivations are different, but the result is fact. 8 out of 10 people would actually do it. Of course, the right circumstance have to be in place, et cetera, but point being, contract is now becoming much more of the norm and very acceptable across kind of all skill categories. Part of it, the majority of growth in the kind of the workforce has been on the temporary or contract side. A lot of that is driven by the use of independent contractors and freelance. It's really, I mean, Uber has introduced kind of the shared car service. This is almost the shared job. And you're bringing in people for expertise in a specific area, and then they move on, take that experience and bring it to another client, becoming very, very popular for employers and workers alike. So, circling back kind of all together, that's why HR and procurement have started to and really need to continue to align on engaging talent, because now Billy will consider a permanent job or a contract job. And when we're engaging with them and getting them into your company database and you're interviewing them about where they would be a good fit, you now need to look at, would this person be a good fit for permanent or contract, and consider that individual for all opportunities within your organization. So that's kind of why we're here today. It's these organizations needing to work better together, have a single kind of total talent strategy, and make sure that you're engaging every possible worker for every possible role. Unemployment, like in IT, is now drifting below 2%. So at no point can you continue to look at a perm worker versus a flex worker. It's all one strategy. So what we're going to go through is a number of the questions that were submitted in advance. Thank you to all of you who participated via LinkedIn. And at this point, Bill, honestly, you're really the expert, 30 years in the category. I'm going to fire some questions at you, maybe add some comments, but in your opinion, Bill, how have organizations been changing their approach to securing talent?
Well, I think they have really started to look at using contingent labor a lot more. So even if we look at the procurement field, it would not be uncommon for a CPO that's looking for a specific commodity expertise to bring that commodity expertise in. Let's say buying steel, bring someone in that's an expert to work through the process, build a strategy, and then exit at the end of the strategy so they could execute the contract. So we're seeing more and more specialists enter the field. We're also seeing a lot of change in terms of how we secure talent and what we do from a procurement standpoint. So 2 case studies that I can talk about is I worked in a aerospace company, and of course HR was already working with building an MSP across 10 divisions, and they had $1 million savings on the thing, but it was taking them 2 years, right? So procurement was forced into the mix, but the thing that they brought to the party was data analysis, extreme data analysis, and when they looked at all of the contract that was about to be implemented, they found that there were misalignment in the way that rates are for professional or technical people versus operations people and administrative people, and they identified that the savings should have been $3 million. So it had taken almost 2 years to get to the contract phase. Procurement came in, raised the savings, identified that one of the suppliers had financial difficulty. So I think there's more of a working together between procurement and HR, building strategies and identifying where the commercial aspects are.
Good. Yeah. Makes sense. I think the offering that organizations, I'll add to it, has changed drastically. Like whether you're permanent or you're a contract employee, putting things out like flex hours or the office layouts, that's attractive to everybody. The rotational leadership development, more and more we're seeing interim placements at the executive level, and a lot of organizations are using these interim placements as an opportunity to kind of test executives out before they go all in, and they'll move them around different departments. So at the senior level, that's definitely something that we're seeing on our side. Moving to
Travis,
yeah.
I think that there's a lot of attention paid to some of the millennials that are coming in because statistics say that they'll have at least 20 jobs in their lifetime. So developing people, training people, giving them challenging work is another thing that I see people really paying attention to. It's not just the old routine, do the transaction and be happy with it. It's really drive yourself to a new thing.
Well said. Well said. Next up, how have organizations shifted their view on developing a contingent workforce to cover the talent shortages in the supply chain?
Well, from my perspective, another client I worked with was in the gift area around Christmas time, and so in July their workforce was 2,000, but by October it boosts up to 10,000. So they really have to have the availability of people. Also work in the home building industry where it's really important to get the house done and get a return on your capital. Sometimes it's even more important having that strategy in place so that you can get your communities done, collect your return on capital, and increase your profitability. And nobody wants to go into some of those fields like packing gift boxes or construction or truck driving. So I think that it's very important to align with organizations that can help you find the talent that you need to complete your business mission. So I'm seeing a big change in terms of combination flexible, but really aligning with the right suppliers that can find the talent, get the talent in, whether they be niche suppliers or whether they be commodity suppliers or generalists. Yep,
I'll kind of echo that. We're a large RPO provider around the world, but one of our strategies is, and it might sound odd to someone who's not in our space, is to recruit other staffing agencies to really make sure that we're hitting those niche categories. So, for instance, we're an MSP for a large brand in Canada, and we've engaged with a tax specialist, an executive search specialist, and an audit specialist. Even though it's our responsibility to recruit the roles, having that network of a supply base is crucial. The next one, I'll just quickly add in there, is the compliance. We spoke about it a little bit earlier, as what kind of drove the need for a payroll provider, but that was really just looking at, a co-employment or a worker classification challenge, and that's now moved into, when you think about, a large bank may have 1,000, 2,000, 5,000 non-permanent workers on their site at any given day. This is a kind of a transient workforce who you don't trust, you don't know them, they're not loyal, they're only going to be in for a week, 6 months, a year, and for whatever reason, it tends to be the workforce that we do the least amount of background checking on. For a permanent employee, you'll always run a criminal check, you'll always do 3 references, you'll probably do a credit, you'll end up doing their employment verification. But when it came time for this temporary worker, geez, we need a receptionist for tomorrow, you'll make a phone call, receptionist shows up, and you're like, we've ticked the box. But this individual now has access to your entire network, your entire directory, they're walking around the facility freely, and obviously there's been a lot of issues surrounding that kind of risk over the last few years, specifically data security. So looking at how individuals or companies are managing this workforce, not just procuring them, is one of the hottest topics that we see today. So kind of encompass that all with one word of being compliance, but it's obviously a lot more than that. Next up, how should procurement requirements, Bill, be defined for talent management?
Well, I think that the procurement folks have to have a really good blend of strategic business skills, really have to have a knowledge of finance. They have to be relationship-oriented. They really have to be good with data analysis and understanding where to go. They have to be good at influencing because, as we discussed earlier in the webinar, sometimes it's been an HR function and ownership, and now it's a shared ownership. So it's really, really important that you bring to bear influence, relationship, and the ability to understand, tie in, and meet the stakeholders' business requirements. So I think aligning with stakeholders, and really what I think happens when we're looking at procurement is you have to have a separation of roles, and you have to really be when you're working with a cross-business team of HR and procurement, you're going to have to understand what the technical role is. So really the HR folks have the technical role, the procurement people have a commercial role, and the thing that blends them together is taking those two skill sets and blending together a strategy that they can work together on, and coming up with a process that takes bias out and gives us the best sources we can through the process. So supplier selection process, and then understanding what tools you can use and what tools you can't, but really understanding that you have a more strategic business relationship. It's not a tactical turn the crank kind of thing, especially now. I mean, one of the things that's kind of changed, and you can talk to this, Travis, is that technology is a big part of this whole recruiting effort. The person's going to have as you started to say, in the old days it used to be HR managed everything, but now a lot of this stuff is coming through, and we have bots and other things doing the initial screening. So understanding that technology, finding that technology, and having the skills to be able to take that data and put it together and influence the stakeholders on a process that's going to deliver the results is the way it's going to change and be defined.
Yep, well said. I think these days there's really very little within a business that you couldn't tie back to technology, and then of course procuring talent is no different. When we kind of roll out programs at different organizations, there'll always be the old days, of course, there's a time capture mechanism, but now it's what are you doing differently? And there's the freelancer management tools that are out there, or the freelancer recruitment. I mean, Upwork is a big one within that space. Looking at the SOW engagements, it used to be just strictly, is it approved, and then pay the person. And now there's different mechanisms that we're using that look at an RFX process in itself. How are the milestones being tracked? Can the SLAs of that SOW actually be automated within it? The data behind it, how can we use that RFX in order to drive down the cost on the renewal in 3 years? So the tech around the selection process within itself. And then the talent management side, I mean, we work with a tool right now that's really, I don't know, in our opinion, groundbreaking. We don't own it, but when you engage, let's say, 100 workers, and the 100 workers then go out to the site, they'll have an app on their phone, and the app will tell us via GPS how far is that worker from the job site. Based on the traffic, are they going to be able to get to that job site on time? And if not, it allows us to flag it to the manager. Then once they're on the site, they'll take a selfie to prove that it's them who's carrying the phone and they're on site right now. And then their phone, in effect, becomes a timesheet. So we'll track their hours throughout the day. At the end of the day, they take a selfie and they drive away. And the timesheet is kind of GPSed in real time for every minute they were actually there. So looking at procurement requirements for talent management, if I was on the kind of review side of a talent management RFP, probably the number one question I'd be asking is, what are you doing differently, and how is your technology going to make my process easier and provide a higher quality candidate? So tech for me is the way forward.
Well, Travis, one other thing that needs to be mentioned is in building these requirements, one of the things you have to identify is performance. So what's the desired level of performance, and then secondly, how are you going to measure it? And so I said that there's a separation. HR is going to own the performance measurement, but the performance requirements are going to be defined well in advance of us doing any sourcing at all together, and I think that's a critical piece of the requirement.
Good. Next up, what is the appropriate supplier relationship with a talent supplier? And even though I'm a talent supplier, Bill, hold no bars. Go ahead.
No, I won't. But I'll tell you, it's because the talent management is one of the most critical components that we're we're sourcing right now, almost in every industry. So if you think about it, I just read an article where there's not enough truck drivers to deliver all of the freight that we're going to have in the next 12 months. There's not enough people to build houses. There's not enough. So anything you're sourcing is going to have a critical talent management, and within your own organization, getting the right talent is going to make the difference between competitive advantage and competitive disadvantage. So having the right team in place to work together is going to be critical. So I think that it's not just turn the crank and put out an RFP and find someone. It's going to be we have to have both a balance of niche suppliers and generalists to be able to find the talent we're looking for and help us grow, find the right people that we can grow into our organization. So I think it's more of a strategic relationship over time. It's not going to be one of these, we found the job, good luck, go away, and if another search comes up, we'll get it. It's going to be a longer-term thing. And as we start to move to master service providers, which are doing both the recruiting side of the business and the contingent side of the business, it's becoming more and more of a extension to our own capability. So it's definitely a strategic buy from my standpoint, and the person that can't find the contingent labor or can't find the needed talent isn't going to be in the mix. They're not going to be performing, and they'll be out of the mix. So we're starting to see an industry consolidation, and I think it's going to be moving more and more strategic. It's not just someone's going to throw 10 candidates at you and hopefully you'll find one you like. It's going to be someone that can find the right talent, put them in the position, and then have them grow in that position. So it's not a turn. So I think it's a strategic relationship. I think it requires negotiating by principle. What are the principles of the relationship? What are the criteria and performance you're going to deliver? How are you going to deliver that? And you're going to have to use a network of sub-suppliers to be able to deliver what we need. So you're fixing our complexity, you're taking complexity away, and you're delivering high levels of performance. And if you're not, then you won't be a supplier.
Yeah, you hit it for me with the strategic. And definitely we're seeing, of course, everything moving towards a consolidation, but the more consolidated the space is getting, the greater the partnership that we're seeing from the client side. And I suppose you could tie that into the strategy, but for us, as a provider, both as a recruiter and an MSP, the most appropriate relationship is to have us as close as an extension of your day-to-day business as you can possibly have it. Rather than being a reactive relationship where you tell your MSP, geez, I need 30 people and I need them to start Thursday, having that person at the table to do your workforce planning. When you've signed a 3-year or a 5-year engagement, however long it is, it's at that point that we always advise, let's open the books, let's sit down together, and let's look at how that roadmap is. I know we've saved a lot of clients a lot of money by being able to provide alternatives, whether it's a call center that you currently have in New York that we're able to recommend a provider that we work with in the Philippines, or if you're paying 25% markups to your recruitment providers in the IT category and all the pressures moving downwards, being able to identify suppliers that might be overseas who are doing offshore recruitment into your nearshore talent pool. So opening the book, looking at your priorities, and then sharing that with your partners in order to help find the most strategic way of delivering the end result, we find to be the best way forward. So open and honest.
It's the most cost-effective, and you've got to have a partner that has a global reach and can do the kinds of things that you just said. So I think the more consolidation we get, and the harder it gets to find talent, the more strategic the business category is going to be.
Good, well said. Okay, roll forward here. This is the big one. Honestly, I think you could do an entire webinar based on this topic, but as everything begins to become shared and HR and procurement begin to kind of cross over, when do you bring them in to an RFX process? So let's say if somebody is running an outsourced pure 1,000 contract worker category, you're going out to RFP, should you engage HR? When should you engage HR? Or if it goes on the other side, when should HR bring in procurement? And how ultimately in this shared category can everyone play in the same sandbox together?
Well, I think this is a good question, and I think it's one that that requires a lot of thinking. But I think that when we look at the whole indirect category, the category of indirect management, indirect category management, one of the things that we see is that it's really critical for all the parties to work together. And what we're finding is that you can save a lot of money, a lot of time, reduce complexity. I think the critical piece of this is really assigning the roles. So, there's a commercial role for procurement, there's a business and technical role for the HR group, and I think when you start to look at those two roles and you get collaboration on it, and we all are going for the same, we want the best supplier at the most efficient cost that's going to reduce complexity, going to get us the talent we need. When you put them together, you're going to find that you're going to get better results. All right. So what I find is those initiatives should always start. What we have found is that sometimes there's a resistance from maybe HR because they have the expertise, or they've had it, or they felt the power. There's a lot of power and control when you're dealing with suppliers. But what I've seen time and time again on projects, whether it be travel management, fleet management that are under HR controls, recruiting, relocation, any of those things, what I've seen is when the groups come together, they appropriately define the business requirements. The commercial people educate the HR people in terms of what the commercial expertise is, where we put in processes to get rid of the bias, then we're going to get the best results. So I think it's always best to do it right at the front end of a project. I think it's best to outline what the goals are. I think it's best to outline what the roles are. And then it's best to, work together to build a strategy, because it is a business requirement. It's not just a functional procurement requirement or a functional HR requirement. The business requirement is to get the best people we can, the best talent we can, at the best time, at the best cost. So all of the indirect programs work like that, but the HR one is particularly important. And I think it's getting over the my territory, your territory, and just defining how it's going to work and what the strategy is and how each party is going to play in that category management process.
Yeah, I could not agree more. I have been involved in so many instances over the years where maybe one group ran the entire process, didn't bring the other in until it was too late. And then, although it shouldn't, ego often plays a role in these sorts of things. And one internal organization would get upset that they weren't brought in and they never got to have their say, and end up putting roadblocks at some point during the end. Even if you end up getting the opportunity through, kind of the animosity that's then held internally between these two groups, it just does not lead to a productive partnership for anybody. So where I've seen it work best is exactly as you said it, right at the onset, all stakeholders from across the business, procurement, HR, and users, exec, all at the same table, define the strategy, and then go out and work together. So to me, that's honestly the most important bit. We'll move kind of over here. What are some of the new ways to engage talent through the different channels that are out there? What are you seeing, Bill?
Well, I mean, what I'm seeing is that a lot of companies can't find the exact talent they're looking for, but one of the things I think that they are doing is they're either going to Contingent to fill the gap, or they're bringing in people that have development capabilities. So groups like, in the procurement side, groups like CIPS can come in, develop the right talent, move it from where it is to where it needs to be, do a competency assessment, understand what the competencies are that are required, understand what the competencies are that the companies have. So I see a lot of people that are coming in and going through leadership development programs, like you said. They may be rotating across the business, but they're certainly getting lots and lots months of development to prepare them for the next level if you can't find ready-made talent. And I think what we're seeing is that you can't find ready-made talent, so you've got to develop the talent. The other thing I'm also seeing is that we're getting young grads, and we're bringing them through and bringing them up in the company. We're using contingent labor, so we're doing a lot of things right now to engage in different channels. So I think it's the young recruiting, it's the bringing people in, developing them, and that may be the contingent workers as well.
Good. I'll add two there that I have on the screen, kind of moving right to left here. One big one are referrals and alumni programs. Yeah. A lot of organizations designing robust referrals internally. So if you're going to pay a staffing agency, X amount of money, why not take a portion of that fee and just pay it to my internal employee if they're able to find the same person? This is you're kind of arming your 2,000 or 5,000 employee organization to be your recruiters. They know your culture, they know your needs, they know your technology, and they know who makes a good fit. So they are really your best recruiters out there. And then second to that is the alumni. As we look at the growth of the contingent workforce, one of the biggest offers of payroll providers, and that's one of our offerings certainly, is as somebody retires or as somebody finishes a contract, we build engagement networks for this crowd so that if there's an opportunity to bring them back, whether it's for a project or just a piece of expertise, or maybe it's a long-term contract, we've been able to stay in touch with them and kind of nurture them along the way. So alumni sourcing is becoming very, very popular. Alumni, of course, not just being permanent. And the second one I'll jump to is SOW. SOW, through the indirect category, is being used not just by your traditionals anymore, your IBM, your Accenture, to bring in 20 people for a project, but now through your traditional staffing provider. And you might sign them to a 5-person sourcing deal, and it allows you to kind of work a little bit outside of your traditional MSA, usually get a much better price point because you're buying a bulk piece of work from one provider, but that's a new way that we're seeing the procure move forward.
Yep, I see all of those.
What are the cost-saving trends or potential within the human capital category? Obviously, we're getting into the hundreds of millions, so I'm sure there's plenty out there.
Yeah, well, one of the things that we talked about is you got to calculate your cost of switching and what your true cost is. So what's your total cost when you look at someone that's trying to reduce complexity, and they're going to an MSP, one supplier that can search the globe and find a couple of resources for them. So there's a big internal cost that goes away, and you free up a lot of people to do some different things, or even free them up to maybe reduce the workforce. But nonetheless, we're seeing that's a savings in itself, just getting the complexity, not having 10 different HR people run around the globe trying to find all this stuff. So there's a savings there. And then if you have the data analytics, like I said initially, like we did work with a big aerospace company on a temporary labor project. We looked at the data analytics, and we looked at it significantly to find out that there was really a misalignment across every category of markup. So they were all in the wrong places, and when we looked at what the markup ought to be, there was an additional $2 million in savings that they hadn't seen. So having the data, having the analytics, it's not uncommon to see 15 to 20% reduction in a category when you're developing a good category strategy and implementing it. You won't see that every year. You'll probably see it one time, and then you'll base a relationship that's on continuous improvement over time. So that's my view.
Yeah, you mentioned there are markups when we'll be rolling out at MSP. It's not uncommon. We'll usually discover 20, 30, 50 staffing providers within it, markups ranging from 12% to 70%, and getting that 10 to 15 quick savings is usually just kind of bringing everyone onto one agreement and one set markup within a piece of technology that can actually track it. And then the second one will be payrolling, and again, I know we don't like that word, especially for 1099s or incorporated. but payrolling in the sense of paying a worker. Before a company usually launches a payrolling program, they don't usually realize how large that category is. And it's just ended up where your line manager knows this Java developer from his last company, and he's going to bring him over, but geez, how do I put him on our books? I'll give him to my favorite staffing provider. And the favorite staffing provider will usually give somewhat of a discount, but nowhere near the $1 or $2 per hour that you should be paying for payrolling services. That's one way that we see savings in the category. And then the second way within payrolling is, I'll keep using the Java developer, that software development manager, their job is to write code, run a team. They don't negotiate rates. They don't know market rates. So when their friend or their contact from that last company comes over and they say, well, I want $85 per hour, they're usually like, okay, like that sounds reasonable. And using an outsourced payroll provider who knows the market, who negotiates as a career, we can typically knock down the rates 10 to 15% just on that initial phone call to bring them more in line with market expectations versus what their friend was able to provide them with. That's a second big space that we see out there. Those are just the hard savings, not the risk that you're getting around as well.
Well, the other thing, Travis, back to that total cost argument.
Yep.
Back to that total cost argument. How long does it take to fill a position, and how long are you operating without a person? And then and how much of your team are you devoting to looking all over the globe for the right person to fit that job? Whereas it's better to be in a network where you're more apt to find that. So it's what's the cost of the complexity, what's the cost of the internal organization, and then what's the cost of not having that person in the job.
Good. And then lastly here, before we deal with some of the questions that have been coming through, HR knows who they like in a talent acquisition partner. They've probably been working with them for years. Procurement has motivations that they know, maybe who's ethically sound and has contractual terms that are favorable, and they like the payment terms, but everybody needs to come together and select one person. So how should procurement go about taking HR's consideration and moving forward to select a TA partner?
So one of the things that I've done when I'm working with a category like this is really define the business requirements. So take all the names out and say, okay, let's forget who's there, what we're doing, but let's identify all of the things that we would want in the best supplier in the world. And then we brainstorm and come up with all these ideas. And then what I tend to do is I tend to now put the names in. So how's our current supplier doing against the best supplier in the world? And what you find is, well, maybe they're not delivering everything they could deliver, and maybe we're not getting all the value that we could get. So, taking the names out, identifying all the criteria and business needs that we have, not only the needs, but, what are the wants, what are the must-have, what are the wants, and what are the wishes. So put those all down and then map the supplier against that. And what typically happens is people come to the realization that maybe they're not getting the full value from the supplier. So having a really good process to identify those business needs and then mapping all those suppliers against that business need and really coming up with, really stretching our minds about what's the best supplier, what are the key things we're looking for, what are the key areas that impact our business the best, and then if we could have everything we want, what would we want? Mapping it out that way with the stakeholders, and then putting the names in really help us identify what we are getting or not getting. And even if we are forced to go with the same supplier, the fact that the ask list from that supplier is going to be a lot more significant once we do the exercise of must-haves, wishes, and wants.
Sure. The piece of advice I'd give is look 3-5 years down the road. Moving a contingent workforce is like turning an airplane, and you want to make sure that to go through a process that's kind of that long, that you've made the right call. So yeah, your needs today might be an X, but where your company is going in 3 years, can this provider help you get there? Or once you're there, can they continue to add value to your program? If your contingent spend has been tracking upwards year over year, which most companies have, Do they have the funds to cash flow that? Have you gone into their office, lifted up the hood, looked at the recruitment process? Have you audited the compliance yourself rather than just trusting that it's being done? So I would do due diligence on that side, but then also ask a lot of questions in the RFX process about how you can help us get to the end goal, and then once we're there, what value could you continue to provide us with? That would be my piece.
Well, that's a great point, because I was working with an HR group and a team, and they were dead set on going forward with their existing supplier. And when we did the due diligence on it, we found the suppliers in great financial difficulty and wouldn't be able to manage the scope and scale that they were looking for. But they didn't have the expertise to think about looking at the financials. They were just looking at the services provided and the relationship they had. And then again, when we did the due diligence, that particular company didn't have the financial resources, and they would likely not have been a supplier through the end of the contract term.
Right. Good catch. Okay, that brings us to the end of kind of the questions that we had in advance, so thank you to those who submitted them. I did get 3 come through while we were talking. Bill, jump in with your comments, but the first one, do you consider statement of work people as temp? Broadly speaking, I would say no. To be quite frank, I always encourage employers to not use the word temp at all. No one likes to be referred to as a temp. Even if you are a temp and you're only there for the day to cover someone's sick leave, it's almost a derogatory phrase these days. So contractor, contingent worker, flexible worker would definitely be a little bit more friendly, especially if you're trying to keep this person long term. But taking a step backwards, no. Statement of work, traditionally, I would look at it as a contractor, a consultant even, but definitely in the category where temp is often kind of lumped into. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Bill, or...
No, I think that's right. I mean, they're there for a specific task. They're going to be there for a specific time. So they're really working on. They're a really project-based worker.
There you go. Next question. In your opinion, what will the CVs or resumes of millennials look like? And then a suggestion. Maybe it's a 1-page, 20-bullet point where the hiring manager looks up the individual on social media. Or will CVs be replaced by social media profiles altogether? I don't see that happening. I think LinkedIn is about as close as you're going to get to it. You really want to kind of often, at least, protect your private life from a lot of number of threats. So personally, I wouldn't want to leave my social media profile open to the world, not because of employer purposes, just because, I mean, data security within itself. So as a job seeker, you want to be found. So there's certain pieces of information that you'll put out there, and I think LinkedIn does a great job of doing that. But I don't believe other social medias, if you're referring to a Facebook, et cetera, will ever replace that. And then secondly, what will resumes of millennials look like? Honestly, they're looking like some of the most creative resumes I've seen. Video resumes are becoming quite popular. Interactive resumes where if you click on something, it'll then take them to a piece of their personal life or a video of them playing the piano instead of talking about what their interests are. It allows you to get a deeper insight into who the person is, what their personality is, rather than just a piece of paper. And for a while there, the employment crunch was really, really tough on the millennials. It's much better now, but it really drove that need for creativity and that need to stand out. And that's just kind of continued to move forward as the economy has recovered. So that's where I see things going, a little bit more interactive than the Word doc that you and I are familiar with, Bill.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is that you really need to demonstrate you have business skills and you have relationship skills, because those are really important. The technical competence can be taught, but the business skills and other issues maybe not so much. So that's my view.
Yes, last question, and it looks like that's probably good based on the time. We've almost gone the full hour. Someone is wondering how they find out more about that contingent worker app that replaces the need for timesheets. Honestly, you send me a note on LinkedIn. Again, it's Travis O'Rourke. I'm happy to kind of show you what that looks like, give you a demo, case study, whatever it is. It's an Irish company, and yeah, happy to talk to anybody about it. With that, I've put some contact info up on the screen. Bill's, I know, a wealth of knowledge. Unfortunately, Bill, I'm going to offer up your time here. Definitely email Bill, email myself if there's anything else that you needed extra insight on or follow-up questions that you didn't want to have answered in front of the crowd. But for myself, thank you. Bill, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you. It was a great webinar.
Really appreciate everyone attending. Add us both on LinkedIn, grow the network, and you never know, we'll cross paths in a world that's not virtual. So thank you very much to everybody involved. Take care.